I don't remember screaming, but I still hear it. Most people think a new apartment is a blank slate, a quiet place to start over. Mine wasn't quiet. It came with a sound that was already living in the walls. It was a low, constant hum that felt less like a flaw in the building and more like something waiting for me. The top floor apartment was meant to be the end of noise. After months adrift in a sea of sublets, each with its own symphony of downstairs arguments, late-night music, and the percussive misery of a shared wall, this place felt like a benediction. It was the highest point in the 4-story walk-up, a small perch above the city's grinding gears. And I signed the lease based on one defining feature: the promise of quiet. That was all I needed to finally focus on the grant, the one piece of work that could anchor me again. The silence lasted for the first hour. I stood in the middle of the empty living room, dust motes dancing in the slanted afternoon light, and I could hear my own blood pulsing in my ears. It was perfect. Then, as the sun dipped below the neighboring rooftops and the shadows in the room deepened, the other sound began. It wasn't a sudden noise, but a gradual emergence, as if it had been there all along, and I was only now tuning in to its frequency. A hum, low and persistent, a single, unwavering bass note that vibrated just at the edge of my hearing. My first thought was the refrigerator. I walked into the small kitchen and pressed my ear against its cool white door. The appliance's own motor was a higher, more mechanical rattle, distinct from the deep thrum that seemed to permeate the apartment itself. I unplugged it. The kitchen motor died, but the hum remained, unchanged, a resonant field that seemed to have no single point of origin. It was in the walls, the floorboards, the very air of the apartment. For the first few days, I treated it as a puzzle to be solved. Bad wiring, I told myself.
It was an old building. Old buildings groaned and settled. I'd trace the walls with my fingertips, trying to locate a source, a vibration, anything. The hum was a slippery thing. The moment my attention focused on a specific spot, it seemed to recede, becoming fainter, almost imagined. But when I'd give up and return to my laptop, trying to weave together the dry, precise language of the grant proposal, it would swell back to its full strength, a pressure building behind my eyes. Sometimes, in my search, my hand would brush over the strange imperfections of the apartment. There was a section of wall near the front door that was slightly uneven, and if I looked closely, I could see the faint, rectangular outline of something that had been plastered and painted over long ago. It was the size of a small electrical panel. I'd press my palm against it, but the surface was cold and still, offering no clue. The hum was worst in the moments of deepest stillness. Late at night, with the city finally muted and my mind exhausted from a day of fighting for the right words, the sound would take on a new quality. It stopped feeling like an ambient flaw of the building and started to feel like a presence. It was the sound of something listening. The quiet I had craved was gone, replaced by this active, breathing static. I found myself leaving a fan on or playing music I didn't even want to hear, just to drown out the unnerving drone that felt like it was watching me work. One night, teetering on the edge of sleep, I was jolted awake. The hum had changed. For a single, horrifying second, it had modulated, a waver in the monotonous tone that sounded almost vocal. A low, distorted vowel sound, like a voice trying to push its way through a wall of static. It was gone instantly, the steady hum snapping back into place as if nothing had happened. But I had heard it. I sat bolt upright in the dark, my heart hammering against my ribs, the words of my grant proposal forgotten.
The sound wasn't a flaw. It was a signal, and I had the sickening feeling that I was the receiver. That single distorted vowel I'd heard in the night was not an anomaly. It was an overture. In the days that followed, the hum began to fray at the edges, its monotonous drone sharpening into something jagged and complex. The sound was shedding its disguise as ambient noise. Work on the grant became impossible. I'd stare at the screen, the cursor blinking in a sea of half-formed sentences. But the only thing I could process was the frequency inside my skull. It was evolving, organizing itself into a new shape. It became a scream. Not a sound that came through my ears, but one that bloomed directly in my mind. A high, thin shriek, stretched and warped, as if recorded on old tape and played back at the wrong speed. It was silent, yet it was the loudest thing I had ever experienced. It looped endlessly, a recording of something I had no memory of ever saying, yet it felt intimately, terrifyingly mine. The sound carried the texture of my own throat, the unique timbre of my own panic. It was a phantom limb of a memory, an agony I could feel but not place. My search for a source turned into a frantic, desperate campaign against my own sanity. I would stand in the center of the room and turn slowly, trying to pinpoint a direction, but the scream was everywhere at once. It was an atmosphere. The one place my mind kept returning to, the one nagging inconsistency in the apartment's blank canvas, was that uneven patch of wall by the door, the plastered-over rectangle. It was the only thing that felt hidden. Driven by an impulse that felt more like self-preservation than curiosity, I went to the hardware store and bought a hammer and a cheap putty knife. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I couldn't live with the scream and a secret in the same small space. Standing before the wall, I hesitated, the hammer feeling heavy and absurd in my hand. Then the silent shriek inside my head pitched higher, a needle of ice behind my eyes, and my hesitation vanished. The first strike sent a web of cracks through the cheap paint. The plaster underneath was soft and crumbled easily. A cloud of fine white dust filled the air, smelling of age and stillness. Beneath the shattered surface was a yellowed plastic plate, brittle with time. It was an intercom system, ancient and long obsolete, its speaker grill a constellation of tiny, dust-clogged holes. The wires leading from it had been snipped clean, their copper ends dark with oxidation. It was a dead thing, useless. My heart sank. It was nothing, just another ghost of a previous tenant's life. And then I reached out. My fingers, trembling and coated in white dust, grazed the plastic grill. The scream exploded. It wasn't a loop anymore. It was a live, searing torrent of pure, undiluted terror that wasn't just in my head, but was my head, flooding every synapse, burning through every thought. The sound was no longer a phantom. It was a physical presence trying to tear its way out of my skull. I snatched my hand back as if I'd touched a live wire, stumbling away from the wall, a raw cry finally escaping my own lips. In the ringing silence that followed, the looping shriek returned to its familiar, insidious volume inside my mind. But I understood now. The intercom wasn't the source. It had never been connected to anything in this building. It was an antenna, and the building's dead wires were its amplifier. The sound wasn't an echo from the past trapped in the walls. It was a broadcast coming from somewhere else entirely, and it had been aimed directly at me all along. We look for quiet places, for a blank slate to build a new life upon, believing that four walls can protect us. But the most terrifying sounds are the ones that don't need a door to get in. They were the ones that were already waiting inside us, just listening for the right kind of silence to begin their broadcast. Thank you for sharing this space with me here on Content Channel. If you were in Maya's position, feeling that growing dread and faced with that plastered-over wall, would you have left it sealed, or would you have been compelled to uncover the secret, even if it meant hearing it more clearly? Be careful what you listen for in the quiet. I'll see you next time, when we'll explore what happens when a desperate signal finally finds its source.